Hey everyone, welcome to the Movie Section Show. My name is Fariba, and today I want to talk about Godzilla x Kong, the New Empire. It's the latest movie that's out in theaters, and I want to just take a chance to go and talk about it. Now, before jumping into my review for it, I do want to give you just my general perspective about how I feel about the Monsterverse franchise. Generally speaking, it's really fun. The first film is absolutely great. Like, I had a great time watching that. I think that's still one of the best films out there in terms of like the Monsterverse franchise. I think it does a really good job balancing out the human perspective and really showcasing Godzilla. Kong Skull Island, I think that's the one that I feel like it's the most aesthetically pleasing. It's the one that's very, stylistic in terms of showcasing its story and bringing in and introducing Kong, especially with the whole 70s setting and that whole Apocalypse Now inspiration. And that alone, that whole film was also inspired by the book of Heart of Darkness. So that was definitely one that was just like, wow, I understand all these references. And I really had a blast watching Kong. I think Kong Skull Island is definitely one I feel like it's the best one in the Monsterverse franchise just because it does a really good job of showcasing the Titan Kong and his story, making it very personal while showing the human perspective, how they're responding to the whole environment. And that's not to say, of course, that the human perspective was deep or layered or anything like that. I mean, it's definitely not. But I think it's definitely one of the better ones where they do respond to things in a much better way. And just seeing Samuel L. Jackson's character and just his villainous nature in that film, like I felt like that's definitely the one where I actually reacted in a way that was emitting a lot of strong emotions. So definitely one of the reasons why I really rank that as one of my favorites in terms of the Monsterverse franchise. And then third one, I think that's what King of the Monsters. That's the one I really struggled the most with. Like I was actually doing a whole rewatch of all four films before Godzilla x Kong, and I literally was struggling watching that film. Like there's a reason why, and that is because of the human story. And that was definitely the one where they really showcased more of the human story than ever before. And I just felt like it really ruined a lot of just the entertainment factor of that film. Like I just did not like that movie whatsoever. And then Godzilla versus Kong, I mean, it's kind of whatever. Again, the best bets, it's gonna be the science stuff. The human perspective I could care less about. So going into Godzilla x Kong, like I will say that this is how I feel about it, and generally speaking, I had a lot of fun. I think it was very entertaining. It was really fun. I think the action sequences were really spectacular. But that's not to say, of course, that this is the greatest film I've ever seen. It's not the best Monsterverse movie. There's definitely a lot of flaws to it. And here's why, right? So, of course, the best bit about this movie is the Titans. The Titans are the best part about this whole film. I mean, why wouldn't it? That's always been the best part about the whole Monsterverse franchise, which is the Titans. The Titans remains to be the best thing. I think even in this case, it's definitely very effective in showcasing kind of what the world is like, seeing these Titans and what they're going through, whether it be Godzilla or Kong. Lots of great things out of this one, of course. Like, we do get to see a lot more Titans in this one. So Scar King, he's very villainous, he's very menacing. We really get to see this really scary Titan who is really hungry for power. That was something that I was like, okay, this is definitely a very interesting way of challenging some of the Titans that we've been seeing for quite some time. I mean, it definitely gives, I feel like in a case like this, like the dynamic that we saw between Godzilla and King Ghidorah is basically paralleling what we see here between Scar King and Kong in this film. Some of the new characters that we do get to see, like baby Kong, Zuko, he was really fun to watch. He's very cute. Seeing his dynamic with Kong was really pleasing to watch. Seeing how that evolves and kind of like this father-son kind of duo, or like at least that evolved. Like I was kind of getting a little bit of like a touch of Last of Us here and there when I got to see a bit more of this dynamic between Zuko and Kong. So that was a really fun bit to watch. But I would say that the big thing I want to say is that this film is without a doubt Kong's story. Like this movie is Kong. His journey becomes really the heart and soul of this film. And which makes a lot of sense because if you were to look back at the Monsterverse franchise, we know for a fact, Kong's story is very emotional, is very tragic in a way because of what he has endured. We understand like his personality and kind of his motives of things, his motivation throughout this film, like throughout these films, what he's really yearning, why he's feeling so sad. And we get this idea very early on, like the fact that he is the last surviving member of his family. We got that, we learned that back in Skull Island. Then we see this still becoming a really big theme for Kong and his story, where it's like he really yearns for a family. And now here it is, like Godzilla X Kong. He finally found people who are just like him, of course, not without its challenges. But yeah, I think this is a film that is really made for Kong. Like, this is his story. He is very central to it. This is his story. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy this, because we get to see this evolution of Kong's story and how he gets through it all, and what really leads him to kind of this, these jumping all these ropes and eventually becoming this sort of Kong that we've been waiting for quite some time. Again, I'm trying not to spoil too much, but yeah, this Kong that we've been waiting for quite some time. One of the things I will say that I was a bit surprised about is Godzilla, because whereas Kong was basically the star of this movie, Godzilla definitely felt really sidelined. Like, his role was very limited in this movie. His screen time was pretty short. Like, I think I would estimate about maybe a good 10 minutes, because he's kind of here and there. We understand the fact that he is very angry. He is trying to power up. He's trying to gain some energy in terms of some threat that he's sensing. We know for a fact that he's sensing a threat, and that's why he's preparing himself to, absorb a lot of energy to the point where he is able to power up in a way. But that was kind of really it. Like, there really isn't really much to his character. Like, the way that with Kong, like, we got that personal level of his storytelling, whereas like Godzilla was just kind of there, which is fine. Like, I mean, it makes a lot more sense when you watch this film. Like, I would say that the best way to describe this movie is that it's basically Kaiju meets Avengers. That's the best way to describe it. Kaiju meets Avengers. And it actually makes a lot more sense, but more so when you get to the end of the movie, because I mean, the end of the movie is absolutely great when it comes to like the final battle scene. But yeah, that's really how I felt about it. It's like Avengers meets Kaiju, or in this case, Monsterverse. So, but yeah, even that being the case, right? Like, Godzilla's kind of there. I will say that when he does start to kind of show up a little bit more, especially in that last act, like, it's really fun seeing the fight sequences and how he and Kong really team up. Some of the fight sequences are absolutely great. I mean, that still happens to be the best bits of watching the Monsterverse. And of course, like, when you are watching, this film, you can't go without, trying to think about Godzilla Minus One and comparing that, because Godzilla Minus One is absolutely phenomenal. There's a reason why that movie is such, peak kaiju movie in terms of how it does really everything around this film. I mean, that film is not action packed as this one, though. Like, I mean, again, it's like day and night when you compare them. Godzilla Minus One is absolutely phenomenal, but this one is actually still fun the way it is, because it is so action packed, and there's a reason why these films are so entertaining for the way it is. So even with this contrast and this comparison, it's just like, well, let each film be great in its own way. I mean, even when you look at this film, like, this film does a much better job in terms of its action sequences and then with Godzilla Minus One. And speaking of that, right? So some of the flaws of this film, of course, without a doubt, is the human perspective. The human perspective, I mean, I still could care less about them. But I will say, for one thing, that the human perspective, or at least their story, is a bit of an improvement from the last two movies, where the last two movies I could really care less about them. This one actually was like, okay, the human story makes a lot more sense. It's a bit more tight. It's a bit more cohesive. It does balance. It does, help try to progress the story, especially in trying to connect with Kong and Godzilla and everything around it. Like, that makes a lot more sense. And again, establishing kind of a little bit more of that lore of Hollow Earth and the subterranean Earth and so on and so forth. Again, that's not to say that it's still great. I mean, it's not the greatest. There are still definitely some flaws that I was able to spot here and there, especially like some of the line delivery. I was like, some of the line delivery was just really off. I mean, some of them kind of made me cringe a little bit. I will not lie about that. There's even one line from Rebecca Hall where I literally was like, did you really just say that? Like, this was on the script? So the line delivery is not the greatest. The human perspective, better, but not the greatest. I will say that I did enjoy one of the new characters, Trapper, played by Dan Stevens. He is definitely a very refreshing sort of energy, because he does give off a little bit of that comic relief. It's been a while since I've actually seen Dan Stevens in a movie, so it's really nice to see him back on the big screen. But yeah, he definitely brings in a lot more of this new refreshing energy that's been kind of missing out of these films. Again, he gives off that Crocodile Dundee sort of vibe, so that was definitely fine by me. Very interesting that we do get to introduce kind of Titan veterinarianism, veterinarian-y, whatever. So that was definitely a very interesting bit right there. I'm sorry I said veterinarianism, I meant to say veterinarian. But yeah. So human perspective, whatever. I mean, you could literally like remove the human story and I would still be like focused on the Titan stuff. Like I think that again, the best part is the Titan stuff. Like you could literally remove the human story and it still be its own film. Like I honestly would not even mind having a whole film where it's all Titans and that'll be it. Like I know the Titans don't get to say much because there isn't a lot of like English verbiage when it comes to their interactions, aside from Kong with his, you know, his sign language. But even then, I honestly was like, I was still enjoying the Titan bits more so than the human stuff. Like the human stuff still is something that the whole franchise still struggles to this day. But I will say again, it's definitely a bit of an improvement from the last two movies. So yeah, if you were to ask me to kind of rank all these films, I would say, you know, first one, I would say Kong Skull Island would be my number one. Then 2014 Godzilla. Then I would actually put Godzilla X Kong as number 3 because I felt like that was definitely the one that was the most. I feel like that's the best in terms of balancing out everything else in comparison to the other two movies that we've gone. I think number 4 I would probably put Godzilla versus Kong, and then the last would be King of the Monsters. I swear I just cannot get through that film. But yeah, I absolutely had I had a blast watching this film. I had a lot of great time. I will even say there's one fight scene. My friend and I literally were just bursting out laughing. It's actually a Zuko scene. It's actually a Zuko, Kong, and like some of the giant apes that we see. And just there's just one move that Kong does that my friend and I, we basically were just like losing it. It was just such an unexpected moment. And we absolutely lost our minds watching that. It took me a while to kind of contain myself in that theater. But yeah, I had a blast watching some of the fight sequences. They were really great to watch. Again, the end battle where we got to see Godzilla, Kong, Scar King, and some of the other Titans that do appear in this film. I was just like, wow, this is absolutely great to watch. I'm entertained. I'm having a lot of fun. It's really action packed. Again, it's not worth trying to compare this movie to Godzilla Minus One because they're so different films. There's a reason why they're so different. Yeah, Godzilla Minus One is the better film without a doubt. It's definitely the better film. It definitely does a much better job in terms of narrating that human story. That is what really is the heart and soul of that film. And then seeing how they kind of bring that together and how they're trying to resolve their issue with Godzilla, who is far more of a villainous character in that whole film. Whereas here it's like kind of like, you know, Godzilla is not actually the villain. He's like a hero to these people. He's like the savior. But even with that being the contrast, right? Even though Godzilla Minus One is a much better film, this one, I mean, it's really action-packed, it's really fun. It's really great seeing all these Titans and Kaijus together and seeing the dynamic, whether or not they're together or against each other. There was even one moment with Kong and Godzilla at the very end. Again, as I say, I gotta say, like, Kong and the way that he's very self-aware, he's someone who's, you know, someone who's actually very strategic and actually thinks about, you know, his actions, whereas Godzilla is not that case. That was very entertaining to watch, just seeing again a little bit of that personality of Kong. Again, this movie is Kong's movie for a reason, right? I mean, he's the heart and soul of it all. We get to see a bit more of how he's finally resolving a big part of his story. And then again, just seeing a bit more of that personality of Kong. Whereas again, because of the fact that Godzilla is a bit more silent, like he just only shows up in those fight sequences, right? So, but again, I just take away the fact that I had a blast watching this. I had a really good time. I was entertained. I think that's the best way to say it. It's entertained. It's not an Oscar-worthy film, of course. It's not the greatest kaiju movie I've seen, of course. It's not the greatest monster movie that I've seen, at least from what I've watched, of course, but I still had a great time. I still enjoyed it. I had a great time with my friends watching it, and that's all that really matters, right? As long as I'm entertained, that's what matters. It doesn't have to be an Oscar-worthy movie. Yeah, the human perspective could have been better. It's still a problem, but whatever, right? So yeah, that's all I have to say about Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire. If I were to give like a rating, I'll probably give it like a 3 out of 5. You know, pretty solid 3 out of 5. Again, I enjoyed it. For me, I personally enjoyed it, but let me know what your thoughts are. If you have seen Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire, what are your thoughts about it? what do you think how do you think it compares in terms of the other Monsterverse movies? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What are some things you did enjoy but could have been better in some areas? Where do you think the actual series is going to go moving forward? If this film, again, if we do get a third movie in terms of the Godzilla/ Kong dynamic, I'm looking forward to it. I'm very interested to see how they will move forward with this project and try to, from what I've been hearing from Adam Wingard, try to maybe at least have this trilogy. So if so, like, I'll be very intrigued to see how that's going to move forward, especially with some of the things that we do get from the end. And if that's the case, like, would you be excited to see that sequel? Let me know your thoughts below and make sure to like and subscribe.